Today's video is sponsored by NordVPN. If you follow this channel, then you'll already know the world's a pretty scary place at the best of times. And let's face it, the best of times, these ain't. With so many of us spending longer browsing the web at home, it's more important than ever to stay safe and secure online. Trouble is, the internet knows a lot about us, and there are plenty of people out there trying to get their hands on that data of yours. One of the best ways to protect yourself is with a VPN. That's where Nord comes in. Want to stay hidden online? NordVPN's double data encryption provides you with increased anonymity. Want more peace of mind? Their VPN protects your communications and personal data and makes hacking into your devices virtually impossible. With NordVPN, your information is always protected, whether you're surfing on the couch, working online in your local coffee shop, or chilling with some Netflix in another country. Speaking of which, their VPN is super handy when it comes to watching all your favourite content, which would otherwise be region locked. Perfect if you want to watch some creepy Japanese horror movies this spooky season. Right now, Nord has a special cyber deal on. Head over to nordvpn.com/masquerade or use coupon code MASQUERADE and you'll make a huge 68% saving on their 2-year plan. They'll even throw in an extra month for free and give you a surprise gift. Find that URL in the description or comment section below and take advantage of that devilish deal. On September 16th, 2009, Mitrice Richardson, a 24-year-old psychology major, was taken into custody after failing to pay her bill at a Malibu restaurant. She was taken to the Lost Hills Sheriff's Department. The officers who arrested her quickly realized that she was displaying signs of psychosis and that something wasn't quite right with her. They contacted her family, and Mitrice's mother informed them that her daughter was bipolar and was experiencing a manic episode. She begged them not to let Mitrice go while she was in that state. The officers promised her mother that they'd release Mitrice at 5 AM the following morning after she'd calmed down. For some bizarre reason though, they didn't do that. Instead, they let her leave at 12:28 AM without giving her back her cell phone, ID, money, or her car, which was at a towing station 11 miles away, meaning she was stranded and alone in an unfamiliar place in the dead of night while in a dangerous state of mind. Pretty much a recipe for disaster, right? Well, that proved to be the case. Mitrice was sighted 6 hours later in the Santa Monica Mountains, about a 2-hour uphill hike from the sheriff's department, resting in a local resident's backyard. Later, screams were reported coming from a vacant house nearby. It's not clear whether these screams were investigated. Unsurprisingly, Mitrice disappeared that night without a trace and was never seen again. Well, not alive at least. 11 months would pass by without any news of Mitrice's well-being. Needless to say, her family were worried sick. It was a hot August day in 2010 when Mitrice was finally found in the wilderness of Dark Canyon. A local ranger had spotted her submerged in a creek. Her half-mummified, half-skeletal remains were protruding slightly from the water's surface. Her head was missing and her clothing had been removed. Her skull was later found nearby and had been placed upside down. The ranger contacted the LASD immediately. The first officer who arrived on the scene was either incompetent or ill-intentioned. He spent 90 minutes there alone before he contacted the coroner's office. 2 helicopters were dispatched to the scene, one carrying more police officers and the other carrying the coroner's team to examine the area. The chopper carrying the officers arrived there quickly enough, but for some unknown reason, the coroner's helicopter was continuously delayed. The team waited and waited to no avail. Their transport never arrived, leaving the police officers alone at the scene for more than 6 hours. The authorities explained this away by saying that there were no other helicopters available at the time, but that later turned out not to be true at all. Suspicious. Also suspicious was this. Despite the coroners instructing the officers not to tamper with the body at all, the cops ignored their instruction, sloppily gathered up Mitrice, and airlifted her back to the station, leaving behind several of her bones in the process. Sheriff Lee Backer quickly declared Mitrice's death to have been an accident. Well, that didn't sit right with anyone. How did they account for the state of her remains? The poor girl had clearly been decapitated. Actually, said the police, her head had been attached to her when her remains were found. The first responding officer had simply dragged her body out of the water by the skull, and in doing so, had accidentally detached her head from her torso. Well, people might have been able to believe that, had the ranger who discovered Mitrice's body not taken a picture of the scene before any officers arrived. The photo clearly showed Mitrice's body in the water, already headless. The cops had just been caught in an obvious lie, just like how they'd lied about not having a spare chopper to airlift the coroners to the scene. So, the cops had already been caught lying, we know that. Next question. Why were all of Mitrice's clothes missing? The sheriff's department said that animals had likely scavenged them. As experts pointed out, that means the animals would have had to unbuckle her belt, untie her shoelaces, remove her socks and 2 t-shirts. A few of those items, sure, but everything? All without damaging her body? It just didn't add up. Now, they had also said that she perished in an accident, and not at the hands of another human being, right? What kind of accident? Well, said the police, she'd clearly wandered off up the mountains and been bitten by a rattlesnake. Okay, that explanation was possible, but far from probable, since California only has 2 people die annually from rattlesnake bites. The most disturbing fact to come out of the investigation, though, was this. Remember how I said Mitrice's body was partially mummified? That could only happen had her remains been stored in an extremely dry environment for a long period of time, like, say, a basement or an attic. Mitrice's family demanded to see the sheriff's department's security tapes from the night Mitrice was taken to the station, the night she had gone missing. The sheriff's department said that the cameras were used for monitoring only, and that they didn't actually record anything. That turned out to be yet another lie, and the surveillance video of Mitrice was found in a station captain's desk after he had denied its existence. When the footage was finally released to Mitrice's family, it had been heavily edited. One deputy who had denied being present at the station that night could clearly be seen in the footage. His name has been kept from the public, and he was transferred to a different area before Mitrice's family could even view the tape. The LASD hadn't tried hard to find Mitrice when she went missing, and had almost certainly been doing their best to sabotage the investigation into her demise after she was finally discovered. They did this by continuously breaking protocol and lying about the information they had. Is this just a case of police incompetence, or is there some sort of sinister cover-up going on here? No matter how suspicious the details of this case are, if it's the latter, then justice will likely never be served. Rest in peace, Mitrice. It was just an ordinary shift for gas station manager Leah Rowlands, back on the morning of March 10th, 1997. The 41-year-old was working alone at the Cozad Amoco on Highway 80 in Dawson County, Nebraska, and though the hours were long and the pay was far from amazing, she was a dutiful and diligent employee. She'd only just been promoted to manager the day before, and as a single mother with 2 sons to feed, the increase to her wages was more than welcome. By all accounts, an outgoing, generous and good-hearted woman, Leah was well liked in her community, which makes what happened to her that fateful morning all the more senseless. At 10:30 a.m, a red Pontiac Grand Am pulled up outside the gas station. The driver stepped out and filled up his tank. Strangely, he was barefoot. He entered the store, where Leah was attending to her mother and daughter. The barefoot man moved to the back of the store and waited for her to finish serving them. He snatched a can of soda off a shelf and drank half of it, and even had the audacity to stare right into the store's CCTV camera. That's the thing with this case. The whole thing was captured on the store's cameras. Once the mother and daughter had left the store, the man confidently approached Leah at the register, pulled out a gun, and appeared to demand cash. Leah clearly didn't want any trouble, as she complied and gave him all the money in the register, $150 total. The man then told her to lie on the floor. She obliged. This is where things could have ended, but for reasons unknown, after waiting a couple of minutes, the man casually leaned over the counter and fired 3 shots into Leah. One of them hit her in the back of the head, a senseless waste. The man then fled the scene in his vehicle, taking his half-empty soda with him. As tragic as this whole incident was, at least the investigators had a wealth of evidence to work with. Not only had his fully exposed face been caught on CCTV, but so had his car's rear license plate outside. He'd also left an almost full set of fingerprints on the gas pump and ballistics from the shots he'd fired. The security footage was aired on America's Most Wanted, and the authorities were sure they'd get a plethora of tips. It didn't seem like this mystery was going to go unsolved for too long. Well, that's the thing. Even with all this evidence to go on, the police never found the guy. Today, 23 years later, his identity remains unknown, and justice is yet to be served. Detectives didn't receive any leads from showing the footage on TV. The guy's fingerprints didn't match with any on the police's database, nor did the ballistics. Due to the grainy outdoor cameras, it took the investigators a long time to identify the man's red car, which ultimately led to a dead end. With no new information to go off, the case simply stagnated and went cold. Nobody knew who the unknown killer was. As for the guy's motive for this blood-boiling crime, there are two leading theories. Firstly, and most obviously, this was simply a robbery homicide. The perp targeted the store and Leah at complete random, with the intention of taking all the cash in the register and silencing the only witness. Well, the only witness that wasn't a camera at least. He was most likely just passing through and had no connections to the local area. Not to mention, his confident and self-assured demeanor suggests that this wasn't his first job, and that it almost certainly wasn't his last. Still, although this case has been compared with other seemingly random robbery homicides, it's never been formally linked to any of them. The second main theory is that this was a planned hit. It seems odd that someone, even a career criminal, would take someone's life for a measly $150. Perhaps taking the money was simply an act to cover up the real motive. Leah and her ex-husband had recently gone through a messy divorce, in which she had taken a large sum of money away from him, not to mention their two sons. Leah had even left her sons a written note, explaining the reason why she'd left their father, that he was cruel and violent, and that she feared for their safety. This, along with the unknown perp's disheveled appearance, has led some to speculate that Leah's vengeful ex-husband hired some sort of down-on-his-luck guy to take her out. With that said, Leah's ex-husband passed away in 2015 and was never named as a suspect in the case. It's disturbing to think that not only could this guy have been free for the past 23 years, but that he could have also struck again, claiming lives for a few measly bucks and a can of soda. Though all the evidence is still on file, and the case is still technically active in Nebraska, it just doesn't seem likely that after such a long time, this case will ever get solved. My heart goes out to Leah's two boys, who lost their mother for so little. On January 27, 1974, 2-year-old Mathew Allen Allred disappeared while playing in the backyard of his home in Claremelle City, Florida. He'd been having fun with his 3 elder siblings. While they moved to the front yard to climb a tree, Mathew stayed put in the back, playing alone on his swing set. That was around 5:15 p.m. At 5:30, the children were called back inside, but Mathew wasn't among them. In fact, he was nowhere to be found. Somewhere in that 15-minute window, he'd vanished. His family were of course sick with worry and stress. His father Vernon and mother Virginia knew how friendly and outgoing their young son was. He'd often approach strangers just to give them a hug. They feared the worst. They searched high and low, but couldn't find their beloved Mathew anywhere. Vernon was able to track down an ice cream truck that had passed by their house minutes before the youngster went missing. Every so often, the Allred children were allowed to buy a sweet treat from the truck, so they hoped and prayed that Mathew had just heard that familiar jingle and followed it. The driver said that a child resembling Mathew had come up to him looking to buy ice cream, but he turned the kid away since he didn't have any money. Fortunately, the Allreds lived in a small, tight-knit community, and more than 800 people in the local area came together to help look for Mathew. Heck, the ice cream truck driver even drove around the neighborhood for hours, playing his jingle, hoping that Mathew would hear the music and follow it home. He should have been easy enough to identify, even for the folks that didn't know him, since he always wore his favorite brown suede cowboy boots. Unfortunately, all of their efforts turned up nothing. By the 29th, the authorities and locals had thoroughly searched the 3-square-mile area about 8 times. They checked all of the canals and ponds nearby and found nothing. They even tracked down the child who fit Mathew's description that tried to buy the ice cream. It hadn't been young Mathew after all. Confident that the Allred family's youngest hadn't just wandered off by himself, the local authorities called in the FBI. They weren't able to find any evidence of foul play, and with no other clues to work with, the case went cold. Vernon and Virginia Allred were beside themselves. One moment their happy son was there, the next he was gone, snapped up and removed from their lives entirely. A scary thought. Their close friends and neighbours, Ronaldo and Mary Pays, an older couple, consoled them as best they could. They knew Mathew as well as anyone, what with Virginia often bringing him over to ride on the ponies in their garden. Ronaldo and Mary Pays. Yeah, remember those two. 16 years would pass, and in all those long years, detectives turned up no clues. Nothing to suggest Mathew was either alive or dead, though most assumed the latter. They were right, of course. On June 4th, 1990, the Allred's neighbour and longtime friend, Ronaldo Pays, passed away in his 70s. The house he had once lived in with his now deceased wife Mary sat empty until 1992, at which point his daughter decided to sell the property. As part of that process, 19-year-old Timothy Scanlon was paid to clean out the septic tank in the backyard. That year was set to end on a dramatic note, as on December 31st, when young Timmy came to clean out the tank, he found something as unsettling as it was unexpected. After cracking the concrete seal and removing the lid to the underground septic tank, he saw something submerged in the foul-smelling muck. Thinking it was just a coconut, he got on with pumping out all the waste inside. While doing so, his hose clogged. Stuck inside Timothy's hose was a small jawbone, ribs, and pelvic and leg bones. That coconut had been a human skull. Timothy called his father, who hosed down a few other items that his son had removed from the septic tank. Among them were a pair of small cowboy boots. Mathew, who'd been missing for 18 years at this point, had only ever been a few houses away from his home, after all. Investigators knew that Mathew hadn't come to rest in that tank by accident. Given the concrete seal and lid, it was impossible for him to have simply fallen in. The kid could not have put himself in there, said Jack Espinoza of the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office. He was killed and then put in there afterwards. That's what we believe. Vernon and Virginia Allred couldn't believe that their son had been found on their close friend's property. Ronaldo Pays was a friendly, good-natured family man, and after Mathew's disappearance, his wife Mary came to their house constantly to help console them. They even stated that the Pays family thought of Mathew as their own grandson. It just didn't seem believable that they were responsible for all of this. Still, Occam's razor and all that. Though this case is still officially classified as unsolved, all the evidence does point to Ronaldo being responsible for Mathew's demise. What isn't known is whether Mathew died accidentally and Ronaldo tried to cover it up, or if he took Mathew's life intentionally. Did his wife know that their neighbour's son was inside their septic tank for all those years? Unfortunately, neither of them are around to answer those questions. The Allred family had Mathew's cowboy boots bronzed to commemorate his short life, a reminder of the young, blonde boy who was so full of life and light, stolen from them far too soon for reasons they'll never know. "I'm glad it's over," said Mathew's sister, Cindy. "We don't have to wonder where he is anymore. All we can do now is go on. We can't stop time. We can't wonder how it could have been." Sadly, in our world, it's not unusual to come across people more than happy to prey on the weak. Mostly these people just want to take advantage of others. The truly evil ones, though, are sometimes willing to take things a few extra steps. Sigrid Bargind was a nearly blind, mostly deaf 87-year-old lady living alone in her small Southside home in Chicago, Illinois. The perfect target for any cold-blooded opportunist. Her case begins in April 1981, when Sigrid called 911 and told them that there were intruders in her house. The cops rushed to her aid immediately, but when they arrived, there were no intruders to be found. Sigrid told them that she had fallen asleep on the couch, and that when she woke up, she saw two figures moving around the living room. Apparently, one of those figures covered her in a sheet, hit her in the head and face, and put her in the closet while they searched the house for valuables. She focused her barely functioning ears, and when she couldn't hear them rummaging around anymore, she fled in terror to her neighbor's house to phone for help, saying that her phone had been bugged since nobody seemed to be able to hear her when she made a call using her device. Sigrid had a black eye, and the sheets in her home were red and bloody. Despite this clear evidence though, the responders were skeptical about whether Sigrid was telling the truth. They believed she may have simply had an accident and either imagined the whole incident or made it up for attention. Still, they took her phone in for repairs and found that the voice transmitter inside had been ripped out by somebody. They fixed it for her and returned it, unsure of whether or not she had been the one who had tampered with it. Throughout April, Sigrid would continuously call up the police from her neighbor's house and tell them that the intruders had broken in again. The authorities never failed to respond, but continued to remain skeptical. Each time they arrived, they found Sigrid alone at the house, with the voice transmitter and her phone removed. They gave Sigrid a new phone, one with a tighter receiver screw, which they glued shut. 1 week later, they returned to her house again, and found that the receiver and cord had been pulled out. As Sigrid continued to report break-ins well into May, the cops decided to routinely survey her house, driving by every so often to check things out. They had her neighbors trim their hedges as to give them better visuals. Even though a social worker suggested that she move out, Sigrid was a proud woman and refused to abandon her castle. Sadly, all those extra precautions were for naught, as on June 16th, Sigrid was ambushed outside her own home after returning from the bank. She refused to give her money to the men who had accosted her, and was able to escape and run to her neighbors once again. They described Sigrid as being absolutely terrified. She would continuously visit them for support during these months of crisis, and they recall how she would often break down into tears mid-sentence, sure that the unknown figures harassing her were going to take her life. "They're going to get me. I just know it," she told them. She was right. On June 26th, Sigrid's neighbors tried to contact her, but to no avail. Concerned, they phoned the police and asked them to go over and check things out. Responders arrived at Sigrid's house and found her lying face down on her bed, dead, her hands tied behind her back with a scarf. The coroners determined that she had had a heart attack. There were no signs of a forced entry. Here's where things get even more unusual. On June 30th, only 4 days after she had died, the police closed Sigrid's case, claiming that she had died of natural causes and that there was no need to investigate further. They had done relatively little to protect her in the months leading up to her demise, but this was ridiculous. It was quite obviously a homicide. Regardless, they stood by their decision and maintained that there was no foul play involved in Sigrid's death. Why did they do that? Did they really believe that she'd tied herself up and then just coincidentally passed away from heart failure? That didn't seem realistic. When Sigrid's family entered her house in August to pack away her belongings, they discovered a large amount of blood on the bedsheets where Sigrid had died. They took photos of the reddened pillows, mattress and headboard. This seemed to confirm what they'd always believed to be true, that Sigrid had indeed been murdered. They demanded that the police release the records about Sigrid's case, but the authorities refused to do so. In September of that same year, a judge ordered Chicago police to release the records at the request of Sigrid's sister, Ingvelde. Her family have since hired a private investigator to uncover more information, but as it stands, Sigrid's case remains unsolved. There are lots of unanswered questions attached to this mystery, the two most obvious being who was responsible and why were the police so determined to undermine the investigation? Perhaps we'll never know. Hey guys, Lazy here, and thank you very much for listening. A huge thank you to Robin Mickelson for making the thumbnail for this video. If you haven't already, check him out via the links down in the description. Also, a massive thank you to all of my supporters on Patreon and YouTube, especially my biggest supporters. Amanda Hanson, Alicia L, Phantom Knight, Alba Medrano, Alex Greensall, AnimeWimp, Aura Dragon 1, Azrael Warakai, Connor Louthan, Crawford K. MacDonald, Expand On, Gina Valera, Hungry and Hammered, Infamous-senpapi, Kelly Rocco, Lord 210, Leonardo Martinez, Kelly Rocco again, Monica Mendoza, Nadine, Philip Westra, Procupidine Natter, Ricky Cohen Jr., Sarah Ramirez, Sieg Carla, Silas Gheist, Sloane Crawford, Valecki, TheOnlyDorita, Tom King, and Decaying Girl. Thank you all so much for your continued support, it really helps the channel out. That about wraps things up for this one, guys. Wishing you all a very happy October and Halloween. Smash that like button or I'll smash you. And remember, the best things happen in the dark.